And that brings us to Ole Miss and Georgia. Ole Miss hosting Georgia as the underdog. 2.5 points. Over-under in that game, 54.5. Chris, I don't think you officially called Lane Kiffin the James Franklin of the SEC, but I think functionally he seems like he's occupying that space in your mind. How do you feel going into this one?
I mean, I kind of just called LSU that, but really it is it really is Ole Miss. It's a more exciting Penn State because Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, 3-11 against top 10 teams. Those 3 wins were Indiana in a 2020 bowl game, so it was kind of weird. Kentucky in 2022, which they got kind of lucky because of some turnovers at the end. And then Penn State in a bowl game last year. So in the regular season against a good, consistently good team, he hasn't done it. He's 0-4 against top 5 teams. He hasn't beaten Alabama or Georgia. And this is supposed to be the Ole Miss team that can do it. And so can he get over that hump? I haven't seen it yet. I will say Georgia's more vulnerable than probably they've ever been since he's been there. And I do like the Ole Miss defense. I think that 54.5 is pretty high. I think this is going to be a low-scoring game. I like the Ole Miss defense. I like the Georgia defense. So those are my early thoughts. The Lane Kiffin narrative. Damien, we said it up top. You're picking Ole Miss in this game. Why are you doing that?
Well, because Georgia is more vulnerable. You set me up perfectly. And the reason why they're so vulnerable is because of Mr. Carson Beck. He is going to do his best to try to give Ole Miss the game, similarly to what he did against Texas. Similarly, he's turned the ball over 11 times in his last 5 games. And listen, I know what we're sitting here thinking. Ole Miss, although Chris just said he likes their defense, they are not known for what they do on the defensive side of the ball. But when you look at Georgia's last 5 games, who have they played? Florida, Texas, Mississippi State, Auburn, Alabama. Out of any of those 5 teams, do you guys see a defensive juggernaut?
I mean, I like Alabama's personnel, but no.
No. Yeah. Well, you know what? Vandy liked Alabama's defensive personnel too,
Yeah,
so
did.
that should tell you something. So what does this mean? This is a Carson Beck problem. Carson Beck is turning the ball over, and it's only because of him. It's not because he's playing these amazing defenses that are playing these ridiculous coverages that he can't figure out. It's not because they're blitzing him at a rate that he can't protect and he can't, figure out some hot routes and to get other guys the ball. He's not seeing the field well at all. He's not making good decisions. He's just standing in the pocket, patting the ball, and then just throwing up for grabs, whether he's not seeing a defender or where he's throwing the ball into a team meeting. He is the problem. And when I look at this Ole Miss team, they've got obviously Lane Kiffin, Jackson Dart. They've got way more offensive weapons than Texas had at receiver. They got, hopefully Trey Harris can play. And then Jordan Watkins, who just went for 260 and 5 touchdowns. So when you look at this Ole Miss team, you look at they're decent, they're proficient enough defensively. They have the offensive weapons and the offensive capability. If you tell me that Carson Beck is going to turn the ball over 2 or 3 times and give Ole Miss 2 or 3 extra possessions, they're going to figure it out. Lane Kiffin is from the same exact coaching tree as Steve Sarkisian. They're almost 2 peas in a pod. I guarantee you guys, he was studying Texas's offense in the game against Georgia just as much as Georgia's defense to figure out what they did wrong and how he can do it better. So to me, this matchup, Georgia is super vulnerable, and Ole Miss is the team that can capitalize on it. Texas even somehow still had a chance to win that game. They just didn't take advantage of Carson Beck's turnovers. I think that, like I said, at the quarterback position, Ole Miss is just as good, if not maybe playing better than Texas right now. Offensively, they've got better weapons. They are going to capitalize on these turnovers if Carson Beck turns the ball over as much as he has as of recently. That's why I think Ole Miss has a chance to win this game.
I want to believe. My head says I see it with Ole Miss. You spend all this money to get this defensive line. You add Walter Nolan, Princely Uman-Milan. JJ Pegues has been there a couple years. You've got these dudes up front to hold up to try and make Georgia one-dimensional. You've got this roster that they've had. And so I want to believe, but I don't know that I see it long-term, and I trust Georgia much better in these big games.
Let me ask you something, David, because you're saying that you trust this Georgia team more. Is it because of Kirby Smart, or is it because of what you've actually seen from Georgia this year? Because Georgia defensively, in the secondary, they're not nearly as good. And the pass rush, their pass rush isn't good enough to cover up their inabilities in the secondary. We had a conversation the other day where we were talking about, does Georgia have skill players? Do they have weapons for Carson Beck to get the ball to? Trevor Etienne, he's been good at certain points of the year, but it's not consistent every single week. So, like, what exactly are you confident in?
I think so, Damien, you could probably speak to this because I'm curious. To me, it just feels like this Georgia team and this Georgia program has been in so many big games. It's kind of just one. It's kind of just another game. You know, it feels like we're gonna get a composed. Like the moment's not gonna be too big for them. The environment's not gonna be too big for them. Like they have bigger goals. They've played in bigger games. They know what this is like. Whereas Ole Miss, you know, it feels like their entire, you know, like I wrote about the last 2 years, all this work has been building. If you lose this game, all that's off the table. They've played in some games slightly bigger than this, but they've never had so much on the line where they had so much to lose. And I feel like you might get a tight Ole Miss team. Did you guys at Alabama, when you guys played so many big games, did you feel that? Was there such a thing as a November game that felt tectonic for you guys?
Well, no, because we didn't have the chinks in our armor that Georgia does right now.
Yeah.
Like we always had great quarterback play. We always ran the ball really, really well, and we always played phenomenal defense, whether it was the front seven or whether it was the guys in the secondary taking the ball away, coming up, making tackles, like disrupting the play. Like Georgia is just so susceptible right now. Like, yes, I agree with you. They have been there before. Kirby's been there before. Carson Beck has been there before. But this is a depleted and deflated Georgia team that we're seeing right now. I almost wonder if their ceiling is the second half that they played against Alabama. That was the most complete we've seen them play. They haven't played like that the rest of the year. So I'm looking at that like, okay, that was desperate times, desperate measures. But in other games that should be just normal games, not even the bigger games, but just another walk in the park for Georgia, they're not impressing. They don't look good. They don't look like the powerhouse Georgia team that we thought was coming after that second half against Alabama.
I feel like we forget, just a couple weeks ago, I was there, I saw it. This Georgia defense mauled Texas in Austin, and that's the visual of Georgia I can't get out of my head. Carson Beck not great in that game, but the defensive line just completely overwhelmed a Texas
After
offensive
watching that
line
game,
that's really
Chris,
good.
I've got to tell you, I think that was more about Texas's offense. Like the more I sat and watched
but it was because of Georgia's defense. Quinn Ewers didn't know what was going on. The turnovers that he was forcing. It's the Georgia defense is the thing I can't get over that defense. I still really like it.
Well, yes, the two edge rushers, they beat up on the tackles all day, but they got a lot of pressure in the interior part of the pocket too. That wasn't necessarily because they couldn't block them. It was because they didn't know who to block. Every time Georgia stemmed from a 3-4 to basically a 4-down lineman and 2 linebackers mugged up, the interior part of the pocket did not know who to block. They were going to the wrong guys. You'd see 2 guys blocking 1. You'd see 2 linebackers running free. And then Cam Ewers is just dirting the ball or throwing it out of bounds. And, like, to me, yes, that was because of Georgia's defense. But that, to me, also sounds like Texas, or seemed like Texas just didn't have a plan for, some of the blitzes, some of the looks they were going to get. I will say, absolutely, the tackles on islands, they sold for Quinn. They didn't hold up for him at all. But the blitzes, some of the pressures they got, it was just more schematics than anything. So I think that was just Texas being out-schemed than that Georgia's defense really being that dominant and that good at getting to the quarterback.